Hey, what is up guys, it is Orbin Hardware, and in this video we're gonna build your next $900 gaming PC featuring Intel's brand new 11th Gen Core i5 CPU and Nvidia's RTX 3060 graphics card. And in this video I'm gonna run you guys through the entire build process, step by step, how to put this PC build together. Then we're gonna test it out in some of the most current popular games, including ray tracing and DLSS. We're gonna run all games and not just 1080p max settings, but we're also gonna look at 1440p high settings too. And this is to give you guys an idea what to expect in case you decide to build this PC too. And you'll easily find all PC parts I'm using linked up down in the video description below. But before we get into the video, hey, my name is Robin, and on this channel we benchmark and we build gaming PCs using the latest PC parts. And so if that's something you're interested in, smash up the like button down below and hit the subscribe button and notification bell, and let me know what price target we should try and hit in future videos on the channel. Now, speaking of pricing, this machine will cost you around $900 using the listed parts, and at this budget you will be able to max out all games out there at 1080p, and at 1440p will also run very well around 60 fps even when maxing out the graphics. But even 4K resolution is possible with a few graphics tweaks. And just so you guys know, we're gonna dive into the gaming performance in much greater detail after we completed the build. Anyway, inside this machine, apart from the 3060 and the 11th Gen Core i5 CPU, we also find 16 gigs of RAM, an M.2 drive, and all of this housed inside this minimalistic Fantex case with great airflow potential. So let's get started with the base of today's build, the CPU, RAM and motherboard. And for today's build I ended up picking the Prime Plus from Asus, coming in at $139. The B560 Prime Plus from Asus is a budget-oriented ATX based board with plenty of features and I/O. We also find our RGB sync support and much more. Alright, so time to install our processor, and for today's build I've gone for the brand new Intel Core i5 11400F, coming in at $175. Now this is a 6-core CPU with 12 threads with a base clock at 2.6 and 4.4 GHz turbo. Now, having a look at the CPU gaming performance, we see that the 11400F is a very compelling CPU for its price tag. I think opting for a 6-core processor offers a great sweet spot or middle ground between price and performance in 2021. Now, installing the processor in the socket is easy. What you want to do is you want to depress the lever on the side by pushing it down and push it out. Now, if we take a look at the socket, we see that there is a notch here, and this is what lines up with the notches on the processor. So you want to turn the CPU so these notches lines up. Simply drop it down and the CPU should fall in nicely. Lower the clamp and the CPU cover should pop off. Now, a cooler is included with the 11400F, which we're gonna use in today's build. Now, while this heatsink is designed to handle the 11400F at normal stock conditions, after benchmarking the machine, it is obvious that we are being held back a bit by fairly high CPU temperatures, and so if you can afford a third-party cooler in your budget, I highly recommend the 34 eSport Duo from RTX. Anyway, the cooler installment is pretty simple. Position the CPU cooler so that the 4 spring screws on the heatsink align with the 4 screw holes on the backplate. Once aligned, make sure that the arrows you see here on the springs are positioned away from the CPU. Then, in a diagonal pattern, carefully press down the spring screw until you hear a clicking sound, indicating that the screw has been locked in place. And with all 4 spring screws locked in place, check the CPU cooler to ensure that it's properly secured to the motherboard. Lastly, don't forget to connect the fan power cable to the CPU cooler to the CPU fan header on the motherboard. For system RAM, we're gonna go with these black G-Skill kit, coming in at around $88, and installing these two is as simple as it looks. For optimal performance, we're gonna wanna populate the gray slot, so simply pull back the toggle for the second and 4th DIMM slot and plug them in just like so. And now we can go ahead and install our M.2 storage device with half a terabyte worth of storage, and this is enough to fit quite a few games actually, and you can always add in another NVMe drive later on, as the motherboard has support for another one as well. So we want to locate one of the M.2 slots, and one of them we find right here towards the bottom of the motherboard. And so what you want to do is you want to look up a tiny plastic bag, and we find this inside the motherboard box, and inside here we find an important screw we're gonna need. So gently slide the M.2 unit into the socket with the little nudge you see here on the opposite side of the CPU cooler, just like so. Then take out the tiny screw that we find inside the plastic bag and hold down the M.2 unit just like so and screw it down until it stops. And now we are done with our base of our build, and we can finally install it in our case. And for today's build, I ended up picking the Fantex P300A, coming in at $59. As we can see, a single 120 fan comes pre-installed at the rear, and there's room to add a bunch more, up to 4 121s or up to 3 140s. Thanks to a perforated front that double acts as a dust filter, the case has potential to become a high airflow beast. Now the case doesn't offer a whole lot of RGB, but yeah, we do find a white LED strip towards the bottom left side, and so overall a subtle, not screaming in your face kind of case if you like. In order to get access to the interior of the case, all we need to do is undo this thumb screw to get rid of the tempered glass side window. Next, we're gonna install our IO shield that we find inside the motherboard box, and this one goes in from the back of the case with the circular audio port you see here located at the bottom. And now we can slide in the whole assembly and secure it, and we're gonna use the screws that comes provided by Fantex. And with the board installed, now is a good time to connect the chassis cables that takes care of the front audio and USB. Let's start with USB 3, and this is what this cable looks like. And the connector is located towards the mid right side of the motherboard. Next in line we have the front audio, and this cable goes on to the left side corner. Lastly, we have the front panel connectors, and you find this on the lower right side. And this can be a bit tricky, but don't worry, don't sweat it, just take your time. So with that done, let's go ahead and install our power supply, and I chose the CV550W unit from Corsair. This is a high quality PSU with 80 plus bronze certification, coming in at around $60 to $70. Now you want to make sure you got the fan facing downwards, and gently slide the PSU into place and secure it. So just a couple of things before we installing our graphics. First up, we got the 24-pin power for our motherboard, and this one goes to a connector that we find on the mid right side of the board. Next up, we find this 8-pin power for our CPU, and this one goes all the way up to the top left side corner. Moving on to the one single most important PC part for our gaming PC, the graphics card. And for today's build we find a GeForce RTX 3060, this particular model coming from MSI with their massive dual fan gaming X cooler. Based on the Ampere architecture, the 3060 offers excellent 1440p gaming experience. 1080p will also run insanely smooth even when maxed out settings. The 3060 also shows great ray tracing performance and supports DLSS, and these are two strong arguments to pick Team Green right now, but we're gonna look into this much more in greater detail after we completed the build. As you guys know, prices on GPUs are upside down right now. Hopefully this gets better as we get closer to summer. Anyway, plug in the graphics card and take these two dual PCIe cables and plug it into our graphics card just like so. And what is left to do is to flip the case around, whack on the side panel, and we have officially completed our $900 gaming PC build. Let's fire up some games and let's take a look at what the PC performs like. And looking at these numbers, we see that the 3060 and the 1100 400F does seem to be a great match. Yeah, the 3060 holds up extremely well, although as we can see, we did see some fairly low 1% lows in some titles, and this is due to the CPU being held back by the temperatures. If you opt for a better cooler, you're gonna see higher numbers as well. Let's have a greater look at some of the games tested, and first up we have Horizon Zero Dawn starting at 1080p, where I went for the highest setting that the game offers. And at 1080p we are able to reach around 79 FPS. Moving on to 1440p, where I went for the favor performance preset. Looking at the results, we see that we're averaging around 62 FPS. Next up we have Death Stranding at 1080p max settings and DLSS turned on. This results in about 135 FPS. Moving on to 1440p, here we saw around 105 FPS on average, again using the highest graphic settings that the game offers with DLSS activated. Moving on to CSGO, and once again starting with 1080p, and here I'm going for competitive settings, and this results in about 350-ish FPS on average. Jumping to 1440p with these same graphic settings results in over 300 FPS on average. Doom Eternal is next, and here I'm opting for the Ultra Nightmare graphic settings. Let's begin with 1080p, and this results in about 166 FPS. At 1440p we saw 99 FPS, again using the Ultra Nightmare preset. Next game in line is Overwatch, and here I'm picking Epic settings, which is the highest setting that the game offers. Starting with 1080p, this results in 129 FPS. At 1440p, we're averaging around 92 FPS. Valorant maxed out runs extremely well with an average of 227 FPS. At 1080p resolution, and at 1440p we are seeing around 230 FPS. Cyberpunk 2077 is one of the most anticipated games of 2021. Let's first take a look at 1080p, where I went for everything maxed out, with ray tracing set to ultra and DLSS set to performance. These settings result in about 60 FPS on average. Stepping up to 1440p, we're able to reach almost 60 FPS, and if we look at the settings, you guys can see that I went for everything maxed out, with DLSS once again set to performance. Now as a bonus, here is a ray tracing comparison between AMD's latest GPUs and against Nvidia's latest offerings, and as we can see, although AMD now offers ray tracing support on their GPUs, they are not delivering as smooth performance numbers as Team Green. Nvidia also supports DLSS, which is a super sampling technology, and this is something that AMD is currently lacking, and this gives Nvidia an edge right now for sure. Again, all PC components used in this video can be found down below. Great news guys, we now have an official Discord server up and running, and if you want to become a part of the community, ask questions either to me or any other awesome people on the channel, you definitely want to go ahead and join the Discord server today. Link to the Discord can be found down below. Now watch either of these two videos, and I will see you guys in the next video.